My phone rang at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. I was in Seattle for a business conference, 3 time zones away from my home in Miami. When I saw St. Mary's Hospital on the caller ID, my heart stopped. "Mr. Anderson, this is Dr. Patricia Mills from St. Mary's Emergency Department. Your daughter Melissa has been admitted. She's stable, but you need to come home immediately." "What happened? Is she okay?" "Mr. Anderson, your daughter was found unconscious in her home by a neighbor. She suffered severe dehydration, malnutrition, and there are signs of. Mr. Anderson, when you arrive, the police will want to speak with you. Your son-in-law called 911, but there are some concerning circumstances." I was on the first flight out at 6 a.m. The 5-hour flight felt like an eternity. My daughter Melissa, my only child, was 29 years old, healthy, vibrant. What could have possibly happened? "I'm Robert Anderson. I'm 58 years old, and I built a successful commercial real estate business in South Florida over 30 years. My wife Catherine died from ovarian cancer 8 years ago, when Melissa was just 21. After that, it was just the two of us. I poured everything into making sure Melissa had the best life possible." Melissa graduated from University of Florida with a degree in marketing. She was working at an advertising agency in Miami when she met him, Brandon Cole. That was 4 years ago. Brandon was 32, handsome, charming. He told us he was a financial consultant, helping high-net-worth individuals manage their portfolios. He drove a nice car, wore expensive suits, took Melissa to fancy restaurants. I'll be honest, I never liked him. There was something off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But Melissa was in love, and after losing her mother, she deserved happiness. So I kept my concerns to myself. They got married 2 years ago. I paid for the wedding, a beautiful ceremony at the Biltmore Hotel, $85,000. I walked my daughter down the aisle and handed her to a man I didn't trust. But what could I do? She was an adult. She'd made her choice. After the wedding, things changed. Melissa started canceling plans with me. She'd say Brandon had planned something, or they were busy, or she wasn't feeling well. The vibrant, social daughter I knew started becoming withdrawn. When I did see her, Brandon was always there, always hovering, always answering questions for her, always with his hand on her shoulder controlling the conversation. 6 months ago, Melissa quit her job at the agency. Brandon said she was stressed, needed a break, that he made enough money to support them both. That was the last time I saw her regularly. After that, it was just occasional phone calls, always brief, always with Brandon in the background. I landed in Miami at 11:15 a.m. and drove straight to St. Mary's Hospital. A police detective was waiting in the lobby. His name was Detective James Rodriguez, Miami-Dade Police Department. "Mr. Anderson, thank you for coming so quickly. Before you see your daughter, I need to ask you some questions. What happened to Melissa? When's the last time you saw your daughter in person?" "About 6 months ago. We've talked on the phone, but Brandon said she needed space, that she was dealing with some personal issues." Detective Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Mr. Anderson, your daughter was found locked in a bedroom in her own house. The door was padlocked from the outside. There was no food, minimal water. Based on the medical evidence, she'd been in that room for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer." The hallway started spinning. "What? That's impossible. Brandon would never." Brandon Cole called 911 yesterday afternoon. He told the operator he just returned from a business trip and found Melissa unconscious. "But Mr. Anderson, we have evidence that suggests he never left town. We have security footage of him at a local grocery store 3 days ago. He was in Miami the entire time your daughter was locked in that room." I couldn't process what I was hearing. Where is he? Where's Brandon? "We'd like to know that too. After calling 911, he disappeared. We have officers at the house, and we've issued a warrant for his arrest. They let me see Melissa. She was in the ICU, hooked up to IVs, monitors beeping steadily. She was conscious but weak, so weak. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked and bleeding. She'd lost at least 20 pounds. "Daddy," she whispered when she saw me. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. I grabbed her hand, trying not to cry. "I'm here, sweetheart, I'm here, you're safe now." "I tried to call you. He took my phone, he took everything." Over the next few hours, as Melissa regained some strength, she told me everything. And what she told me made me want to kill Brandon Cole with my bare hands. It started about 8 months ago. Brandon had been pressuring Melissa to ask me for money. He said he had an incredible investment opportunity, a real estate development deal that would triple their investment. He needed $500,000 to get in on the ground floor. Melissa asked me about it. I said absolutely not. I didn't trust Brandon, and I certainly wasn't giving him $500,000 for some vague investment deal. Melissa seemed relieved, actually. She told me she'd been uncomfortable asking in the first place. That's when Brandon's behavior changed. He became controlling, angry. He isolated Melissa from her friends. He convinced her to quit her job, saying he'd take care of everything. He took control of all their finances. Then, about a month ago, Brandon told Melissa he needed her to sign some papers, legal documents related to their joint finances. She signed them without reading them carefully. She trusted her husband. What she'd actually signed was a power of attorney giving Brandon complete control over her finances. And she'd signed documents accessing a trust fund I'd set up for her years ago. That trust fund had $2.3 million in it. Money I'd been saving and investing for Melissa since she was born. Money that was supposed to secure her future, pay for a house, provide for her children someday. Brandon drained the entire trust within 2 weeks. $2.3 million, transferred to accounts I'd later learn were offshore. But he didn't stop there. Using Melissa's power of attorney and her identification, Brandon took out credit cards in her name. 15 different cards. He maxed them all out, over $200,000 in debt. He also forged documents claiming to be Melissa's husband with authority to access my business accounts. He tried to transfer money from my company. Thankfully, my bank's fraud detection caught it, but not before he'd gotten away with $150,000. When Melissa discovered what he'd done, she confronted him. She told him she was going to call me, call the police, get help. That's when Brandon locked her in the bedroom. He said she needed to think about her choices. He'd bring her minimal food and water, just enough to keep her alive. He told her if she tried to call for help, if she made any noise, he'd make sure she never saw me again. For 2 weeks, Melissa was a prisoner in her own home. She didn't know if Brandon was planning to let her out or let her die. She scratched at the walls, trying to find a way out. She screamed until her voice gave out. But their house was in a quiet neighborhood, and Brandon had told the neighbors that Melissa was away visiting family. Finally, a neighbor named Mrs. Chen got suspicious. She hadn't seen Melissa in weeks, and she heard strange noises coming from the house. She called for a wellness check. The police arrived, found the house empty except for Melissa locked in that room, barely alive. Brandon had disappeared, but not before he'd emptied their joint bank account, sold Melissa's jewelry, and taken anything of value from the house. Detective Rodriguez came back later that evening with more information. "Mr. Anderson, we've been digging into Brandon Cole's background. His real name is Brandon Kowalski. He has a criminal record: fraud, identity theft, forgery. He served 3 years in prison in California from 2012 to 2015. "What? How is that possible? Didn't Melissa do a background check?" "He changed his name legally after getting out of prison. Became Brandon Cole. Got a fake financial consultant license, created a whole new identity. Your daughter had no way of knowing. So he targeted her. He knew she came from money. We think so. We've found evidence he'd been researching your family for months before he accidentally met Melissa at that coffee shop. This was a long con, Mr. Anderson. He planned everything. The anger I felt was indescribable. This man had manipulated my daughter, married her under false pretenses, stolen everything from her, and nearly killed her. And he'd done it all with calculated precision. Melissa was in the hospital for 5 days. The doctors treated her for severe dehydration, malnutrition, and psychological trauma. A psychiatrist diagnosed her with acute PTSD. She was having nightmares, panic attacks, couldn't be alone in a room without becoming terrified. I hired a lawyer immediately, a fierce woman named Sandra Mitchell who specialized in financial fraud and victim advocacy. She started working on multiple fronts: criminal charges against Brandon, civil suits to recover Melissa's money, and restraining orders. But first, we had to find Brandon. The police traced his movements after he called 911. He'd withdrawn $50,000 from an ATM using Melissa's card. He'd been spotted at Miami International Airport, but by the time police got there, he was gone. We thought he'd fled the country, but Detective Rodriguez kept digging. Brandon had made a mistake. He'd used a credit card, one of the ones he'd opened in Melissa's name, to book a hotel room in Fort Lauderdale, just 30 miles north. The police raided the hotel at 4 a.m. 3 days after Melissa was found. Brandon was arrested without incident. They found $48,000 in cash in his hotel room, along with Melissa's jewelry, forged documents, and a laptop with detailed plans for his next move. On that laptop, investigators found something chilling. Brandon had been planning to disappear to the Cayman Islands. He'd already wired $1.8 million to an offshore account. He'd booked a flight for the following week, and he'd been researching how long someone could survive without food or water. He'd been planning to let Melissa die in that locked room. Then he would have played the grieving husband, collected on her life insurance policy, $500,000 that he'd convinced her to increase 6 months earlier, and disappeared with over $2.5 million. The charges against Brandon were extensive: kidnapping, false imprisonment, attempted murder, fraud multiple counts, identity theft multiple counts, forgery, grand theft, elder abuse for the money he'd stolen from my business accounts. The prosecutor, a determined woman named Angela Torres, told us Brandon was looking at 40 years to life in prison. "This is one of the most calculated cases I've seen," she said. "He didn't just steal money. He systematically destroyed your daughter's life with the intent to kill her and profit from her death. We're going to make sure he never sees freedom again." The preliminary hearing was brutal. I sat behind Melissa, who was still so fragile, so broken. Brandon was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, shackled. He looked at Melissa with what I can only describe as contempt. Not remorse, not guilt. Contempt. The prosecution laid out the evidence: the locked room with scratches on the door where Melissa had tried to claw her way out, the medical evidence showing systematic starvation, the financial records showing Brandon's theft, the laptop with his escape plans. Brandon's public defender tried to argue that it was a domestic dispute that got out of hand, that Brandon had temporarily lost control and never meant to hurt anyone. The judge wasn't having it. "Mr. Kowalski, you locked your wife in a room for 2 weeks with minimal food and water while you sold her jewelry and wired money offshore. This wasn't a loss of control. This was attempted murder. Bail is denied." The trial was set for 4 months later. In the meantime, Sandra Mitchell, our lawyer, was working on recovering the money. The $1.8 million Brandon had wired offshore was in the Cayman Islands, and getting it back would be complicated but possible with international law enforcement cooperation. The $2.3 million from Melissa's trust. That was harder. Brandon had moved it through 6 different accounts in 3 countries. Some of it had been converted to cryptocurrency. Some had been spent. We'd recover some, but not all. The credit card debt, over $200,000, was Melissa's legal responsibility since the cards were in her name, even though she didn't authorize the charges. Sandra was working to get those discharged based on fraud, but it was an uphill battle. Melissa moved in with me. She couldn't go back to the house, couldn't bear to be there. We eventually sold it, taking a loss because of the stigma of what had happened there. She started therapy 3 times a week. Some days were better than others. Some days she could almost forget. Other days she'd have a panic attack because a door closed too loudly or because she woke up and momentarily forgot where she was. The trial began in March, 6 months after Melissa's rescue. The courtroom was packed. This case had made national news. Man locks wife in bedroom, plans murder to steal millions. The prosecution's case was devastating. They called Melissa to testify first. She had to walk the jury through the entire nightmare. Meeting Brandon, the gradual isolation, the financial manipulation, the moment she realized she'd signed away her power of attorney, the confrontation, being locked in that room. "What did you think was going to happen?" the prosecutor asked gently. "I thought I was going to die," Melissa said, her voice breaking. "I thought he was going to let me starve to death and no one would ever know what happened to me." They called Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who'd called for the wellness check. They called the police officers who'd broken into the house and found Melissa. They called the doctors who'd treated her. They called a forensic accountant who walked the jury through exactly how Brandon had stolen and moved the money. They called a computer forensics expert who showed the jury Brandon's laptop, his research on survival without food and water, his flight bookings to the Cayman Islands. And they called me. I testified about my concerns about Brandon from the beginning, about the money he tried to steal from my business, about finding my daughter in that hospital bed. "Mr. Anderson," the prosecutor said, "what impact has this had on your daughter?" I looked at Melissa, sitting in the front row. My daughter was vibrant, confident, full of life. She had a successful career, close friends, dreams for her future. Brandon Cole, or Kowalski, or whatever his real name is, he didn't just steal her money. He stole her sense of safety, her ability to trust, her peace of mind. She has nightmares every night. She can't be in a locked room without panicking. She lost 2 years of her life to this predator, and she'll spend years more recovering from what he did to her. That's what he took. That's what he destroyed. Brandon's defense was pathetic. His lawyer tried to paint him as a man with a troubled past who'd made mistakes. They claimed the locked room was Melissa's idea, that she'd wanted time alone to think. They claimed the money transfers were legitimate, that Melissa had authorized everything. The jury saw through it. The evidence was too overwhelming. The scratches on the door, the medical evidence, the laptop with his escape plans, it all pointed to premeditated attempted murder. Melissa gave a victim impact statement at the sentencing hearing. She'd written it with her therapist, practiced reading it aloud so she wouldn't break down. Brandon Kowalski didn't just lock me in a room for 2 weeks. He locked me into a nightmare I'm still living. Every day I wake up and have to remind myself I'm safe, that I'm free, that he can't hurt me anymore. But the truth is, he still hurts me every single day. When I can't sleep because I'm having nightmares about being trapped. When I have a panic attack because someone walks too close behind me. When I look at my bank account and see nothing, knowing that the future my father carefully built for me was stolen by someone I trusted with my life. She paused, looked directly at Brandon. "You told me you loved me. You married me. You made vows to cherish and protect me. And then you systematically destroyed me for money. You were willing to let me die alone in that room, starving and terrified, so you could steal my inheritance and run away to a tropical island. That's not love. That's evil. and I hope you spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about what you did." The judge sentenced Brandon to 45 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He'd be 77 years old if he ever got out. For all practical purposes, it was a life sentence. Additionally, the judge ordered full restitution: $2.3 million for the trust fund, $200,000 for the credit card fraud, $150,000 for the money stolen from my business, plus penalties and interest. Over $3 million total. Brandon showed no emotion. He just stared straight ahead as they led him away in handcuffs. The civil case took another year. We sued Brandon for intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud, and battery. The judgment was $5 million. We'd never collect most of it, but it meant that if he ever had any assets, ever earned any money, it would go to Melissa. Through international law enforcement cooperation and some aggressive legal work by Sandra Mitchell, we managed to recover $1.4 million of the $2.3 million Brandon had stolen from Melissa's trust. The rest was gone, spent or lost in the cryptocurrency conversion. The credit card companies eventually agreed to discharge most of Melissa's debt once we proved it was fraud. She ended up responsible for about $30,000, which I paid off for her. All told, Melissa lost about $1.2 million that we could never recover. But the bigger loss was harder to quantify. It's been 2 years since Melissa was rescued from that locked room. She's doing better. The nightmares are less frequent. She started working again, found a job at a small marketing firm that's understanding about her needs. She's in a support group for domestic abuse survivors. But she's not the same person she was before Brandon. She's more cautious, more guarded. She doesn't date. She says she can't imagine trusting anyone like that again. Maybe someday, but not yet. She lives with me still. Says she's not ready to live alone. I don't mind. After losing her mother, almost losing Melissa too, I'm grateful for every day I have with my daughter. Brandon is at Coleman Federal Correctional Complex in Florida, medium security prison. I looked it up once out of curiosity. He's in general population. I hope every single day there is miserable for him. He tried to appeal his conviction. Denied. He tried to get his sentence reduced. Denied. His lawyer contacted us about a possible settlement on the civil judgment. Sandra told them to go to hell. People ask me sometimes if I blame myself. If I should have done more to stop the wedding, to warn Melissa, to see through Brandon's con. The truth is, yes, I do blame myself sometimes. I knew something was wrong. I felt it. But I didn't want to be the overbearing father, didn't want to ruin my daughter's happiness. I thought she was an adult who could make her own choices. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have done a background check on Brandon before the wedding. I should have been more protective of Melissa's trust fund, put better safeguards in place. But I also know that Brandon was a professional con artist. He'd been doing this for years. He knew how to manipulate, how to charm, how to make people trust him. Even if I'd objected to the wedding, Melissa might have married him anyway and just cut me out of her life. Then she would have been even more isolated, even more vulnerable. So I try not to drown in the guilt. I try to focus on the fact that Melissa survived, that she's recovering, that Brandon is in prison where he belongs. The trust fund I'd built for Melissa since birth is gone, but I'm rebuilding it. I'm 60 now, planning to work another 10 years. Everything I make is going into a new trust for Melissa, one with ironclad protections that no one, not a spouse, not anyone, can access without multiple approvals. Melissa will be okay. It'll take time, but she's strong. She survived something that would have broken many people. She's scarred, but she's here. She's alive. She's fighting. That's more than Brandon wanted for her, and it's more than he'll have for the next 45 years. Justice was served, life goes on, and some days that's enough. I think about that phone call sometimes. 2 4:47 a.m., 3 time zones away, hearing that Melissa was in the hospital. The panic, the fear, the rush to get home. I think about what would have happened if Mrs. Chen hadn't called for that wellness check. If she just assumed Melissa was on vacation like Brandon had told everyone. If she'd waited another week, another few days. Melissa would be dead. Brandon would be in the Cayman Islands with $2.5 million, and I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what happened to my daughter. But that's not what happened. Mrs. Chen did call, Melissa was saved, Brandon was caught, and justice, imperfect as it always is, was served. Melissa turned 31 last month. We had a small party, just the two of us and a few close friends. She's made a few new friends through her support group, people who understand what she's been through. She seems lighter these days. She laughs more. The panic attacks are becoming less frequent. Her therapist says she's making real progress. "Dad," she said to me at her birthday dinner, "thank you for not giving up on me, for fighting for me, for being there every single day." "Always," I told her. "You're my daughter. I'll always fight for you." She smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in years. "I know, and that's why I'm going to be okay, because you taught me that some things are worth fighting for, that you don't let evil win just because it's hard to fight back." That's my daughter, scarred but not broken, damaged but healing, survivor not victim. Brandon took a lot from us, but he didn't take everything. He didn't take Melissa's life, even though he tried. He didn't take our family bond. He didn't take the truth. 45 years in prison isn't enough for what he did. No sentence would be, but it's something, it's justice, it's accountability. And it means he'll spend the best years of his life in a concrete cell, thinking about the con that didn't work, the woman who survived, and the father who never stopped fighting. That's my revenge. Not the prison sentence, though I'm glad for it, but the fact that we won, we survived. We're still here, still together, still fighting. Brandon's in a cell. Melissa's building a new life. And I'm right here beside her, making sure that no one ever hurts her again. That's justice, that's family, and that's enough.